NRL Fantasy buy, hold, sell for round 10. This is arguably one of the most important periods of the season. So we're coming out of that early season period. We're going into the origin period. You need to be laser focused on the origin players, guys who are going to be good through rounds 13, 16, and 19, but then also building out your roster. So this is a really important episode. Really excited to be here with you guys to talk through this week. But first things first, couple of housekeeping points. A couple of sponsors on board, which I'm really excited about, and two that I'm very closely connected to. Firstly, SGK Electrical Services. If you're based out in sort of northwest Sydney, so the Hills area, that kind of thing, they do residential and business electronic work. They're actually the guys that I use as my Sparkies at home as well, so I can refer very confidently. And I've got the SRL Premiership. I'll show a bit of footage here from those guys, but basically it's a competition where you enter a custom player into a competition and they simulate an entire rugby league season and seasons where your player then participates. They get points. They perform certain ways. You can change positions, sign different clubs. It's super cool. So I'll leave the links to both these guys in the description. SRL are looking for players right now. Now, let's jump right into the video here. So first things first, in the buys section, Scotty Drinkwater. This is red hot. And what I'm going to point out here is that fixtures become more and more important as we go through the season, particularly through this origin period. So the reason I don't have a guy like Ruben Garrick on this list right now is 2 weeks ago, I was super high on him because he had Parramatta in particular. He had another easier matchup with the Dolphins coming up here as well. So about 3 weeks of beatable matchups. But after this week, Ruben Garrick enters a period where he has the Storm, the Broncos, a bye, and the Panthers in 4 weeks, which is not ideal for him. So who do I like better? Scott Drinkwater, 706K. Cowboys have a really nice run of fixtures. They've got the Titans this week who, they're playing decent enough footy. They're playing better than their record suggests, but they are leaking a lot of points to fullbacks. And I think Scotty Drinkwater will absolutely tear up in this game. 706K, great cover through the origin period. Very, very low chance of making origin. I reckon basically a 0% chance. So he's an easy option to buy at this point. Herbie Farmworth is another one, 609K. This is a monster pod. And look, the buys and the pods this week, they could be interchangeable, really. But Herbie Farmworth, big pod. Dolphins have an amazing schedule for this origin period. So again, at 609K, he's a guy that we know is a top-tier fantasy center. It's a little dicey with him coming back from injury this week. It's also a little dicey with him being on the Dolphins as opposed to the Broncos. But I think he should be a pretty red-hot option. And I'd be very surprised if he doesn't outscore Ruben Garrick over the next, let's say, 5 weeks of footy. I think he'll be way above Ruben. So if I'm looking at a center, I'd like Herbie Farmworth over Ruben Garrick. Next guy here, Suafe Longo. And this one's a little less confident as well. So, you've got a guy here who comes in. He's an absolute weapon. He's coming from Pappenhausen. He's in that Storm system at the fullback spot. All A1 points there. The downside is it's a 4 to 6 week injury for Pappenhausen. And obviously, we're all hoping he gets better. But also, Suafe Longo, he's got that bye in round 13. So, theoretically, if Paps came back in 4 weeks, you might only get 3 games out of this guy. 394K is not a bad price. He's a very good player. So I still think it could pay off, especially if you're looking at some other guys like Marzu, for example, in 3 or 4 weeks' time. But I don't know. It feels a little dicey. I think there's a lot of upside in this pick. If you just want to grab the points and you're okay with it being a 3 to 4 week rental, go ahead. There is upside. It could be 6 weeks. They might give Pappenhausen more time because they're at the top of the table. But yeah, for Suafe Longo, if price necessitates it, go and do it. But he's not the must-have that other people are saying he is. He's more of a choice, and you can choose to jump in or jump out, and I'll feel okay either way, to be honest. Sammy Finu is the 4th guy here on the buy list. His price actually changed slightly from 430K, but he's a middle and an edge available here. He's playing 80 minutes. They've moved Bateman to edge and Papali'i to the lock spot, and Sammy Finu is the one guy in that back row that hasn't changed. So they clearly rate him very highly. I think he's a bit of a weapon, right? It was about a 43-point game for him. It was all base stats. He's A1. He's a good option. That dual position is really attractive. If you have someone like Morgan Smithies in your team right now and you need to cover that middle spot at 430K or around that price, I think he isn't a very good choice. Max Plath, 640K. Look, I'm keeping on here. Again, the Dolphins buy schedule, amazing, right? He's going to be one of those guys who's going to be super effective through the origin period. 640k, covers the half spot, covers the middle spot. Again, really valuable because you only get to start your starting 13 in the origin week, so you cannot use your bench. So if you have 3 halves, for example, you can only start 2 of them. With Plath, you could move him to middle instead, so you'd be all good. But just keep that in mind. You can only play that starting 13 in the origin week, so that's around 13, 16, 19. Every other week, you can use your full 17. Next group here, the pods. And we've got some spicy pods here. And this is where I really want to lean on Biz, but it's a very early morning for him in New York. And I said I'd take this one solo for him. But we'll get him back next week. Look for pods. Dom Young's the first one here. Dom Young is a very risky option. And actually, to be honest, this entire list is extremely risky. So just keep that in mind as I talk through these guys. But for Dom Young, 505k, look, the upside here is that he is scoring tries for fun at the Roosters. The Roosters are playing really good footy. They are absolutely feeding him the ball. He could have higher scores than this even. His 505k is cheaper because of that minus 12-point game he had, where he got that send-off, which was pretty hilarious. But it's obviously brought his price down to 505k. This is the cheapest you're going to get Dom Young for a long time. Now, do I think it's a slam dunk? Absolutely not. There's a lot of risk to this guy. He can score 15 points for you if he doesn't have the attacking plays, but he can also score 80. The Roosters have an amazing origin schedule as well. I really like their origin schedule. So for Dom Young, if you want a guy at that 505k mark, 500k-ish, I don't mind this pick. We talked about Osako last week at 577k. I wouldn't get on him this week. He's gone up in price. It doesn't make sense anymore. It was a really good schedule last week for the 70-point game, but Dom Young becomes that really interesting buy this week. These sorts of guys, though, like Dom Young, you've got to move quickly when you see the opportunity. So buy him now or don't buy him. I wouldn't wait till next week and see if he scores well and all that. But if you need a wing fullback right now, he's a good option, and the Roosters are red hot. Ryan Madison's the next guy, 522k. Now, how does the Parramatta forward pack play out on game day is the big question here. You got Bryce Cartwright on the bench, which has not been the preferred configuration previously for Parramatta. You have Ryan Madison starting in the edge back row spot for the Eels. I don't know. I'm not confident in that happening on game day. Parramatta play at 8 p.m. on Friday. So if you do want to buy Madison, make sure you pull the trigger on that trade on Friday once you've seen the final team list, because there's a good chance that they change it, an hour before. Brad Arthur loves to do that, and Ryan Madison is a prime candidate for that. Now, the upside here is that 522k is a very good price. He's priced at about 37-point average. If you can get, look, it's risky, right? But he's a guy who can average 50 to 55 points on a good year. But there is that risk again. He's had games even recently where he's played sort of 20 minutes and scored 15 points. So I think you want to be getting about 50 points a week out of him, because you're going to get screwed over at some point when he plays less minutes just out of nowhere. So you need to build in a bit of buffer for that, for this option. If you think he could be a 50-point guy, if you think he can take over that edge back row spot, and Cardi's going to be coming off the bench in some other capacity, Tuolangi as well on that bench too. It's a little risky. I don't mind it if you're desperate for a middle, but I'm personally not going to be jumping on Madison myself. If he locks down that spot and plays really well this week and Parramatta win, then I'm open to looking at it next week. Tommy Eisenhuth, 601k. This is one that you cannot wait for next week for if you want to do it. Now, this is a crazy pod, absolutely crazy pod. He's one of those guys who he's been playing all over the field. So he's been playing center, lock, back row, a bit of prop, whatever he needs to play for the team. And I'll tell you what, for St. George, he's been a very good buy. So in real life, bravo to you, Tommy Eisenhuth. He's been very flexible, very diverse player. 78 points in fantasy this week as well. Now, what does that mean? Is he going to score 78 points every week? Is he going to make 60-plus tackles every week? Probably not. But he's named to start again. He's in the back row there. I think that he's kind of interesting, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. I will never make this trade myself. But if you really like Tom Eisenhuth and you think he's done enough to secure that spot, and you think Luciano Leilua won't come back soon, or will come back down the track and won't affect him, then I could see a world where Eisenhuth is good. For me, it's a little too expensive. I've included him here because he's been asked about a lot. And actually, that's very similar to the next guy here as well. Connor Watson, I put a big cross on there. I was thinking about making a trap section here, but I've just chucked him onto the pod section. A lot of you guys love Connor Watson. No go. No go. Don't do it. 677K is insanely expensive for what he is. They've got Victor Radley back. They got Spencer Lenu back. They have Jared Weir-Hargraves back as well. They are so stacked with middle forwards. The Roosters' rotations, I don't want a bar of it at all. So Gus Crichton is the one guy that we want to get in this team. We do not want to touch anyone else in that rotation. If you've got Terrell May, I can't guarantee anything with Trent Robinson. I almost did. But I'm pretty confident he'll have some absolute shockers over the next couple of weeks because on that bench with him is Lenu. On that bench with him is Nafu White, Connor Watson as well. All three of them play a lot of middle. Connor Watson will play some hooker minutes, but he'll also play some lock minutes too. The theory here is that Radley might play some edge and Nat Butcher might get a rest as well. We actually have an article on the website right now, thecasualathlete.com.au. On the blog section, we've got an article where Lockie went through the rotations and what he expects them to be. Spoiler, they are not good for Roosters players, so do not get on those guys. Connor Watson, skip him. If you haven't already, sit tight, see how he goes this week. I think you'll be selling him pretty soon, though. Last guy here on the pod list, Silva Havili. And look, he's an interesting one. We'll talk about Talis Duncan a bit as well. But Havili, 398K. He's around a point per minute sort of guy when he plays lock. So he produces great points. If he can play 40 minutes, he'll average 35 to 40 points. That 35 to 40 points is worth, a bit north of 500K. If he can do even better than that, then so be it. That's awesome. If he gets a good role there as the starting lock, which is where he's named right now, he's a red hot option. I'm going to wait a week on this personally. At this stage, I haven't sort of locked in one way or the other, but I'd like to see what happens. And we'll talk about it in the Talis Duncan section too. But I'm so uncertain about this South Sydney rotation piece that I can't bring myself to make this move right now. Saying that, if you're desperate and you need a guy under 400K, you need a middle in particular or a hooker, Havili is a pretty good bet with some risk, of course. All right, hold or sell. This is a tough one because I have too many of these players. But we've got Jaden Brayley first. I normally give pretty good advice on this channel. I'm normally looking back, and last week's pod section, they all scored 58 plus. Like they went off. They went crazy. I had a Sarko in there. I had a bunch of these really good pods. But the buy section, I had Jaden Brayley in there, and I went and bought Jaden Brayley as well. And I apologize to you for misguiding you because they ran out on the weekend, and Jaden Brayley played like 50 minutes in that game. Just not good enough. 32 points. If he plays the full 80, he gets about 50 points, but it was not great for us as Jaden Brayley owners. Now, should we panic? I can make arguments in both directions, and I'm going to. So the case that I'm going to make for, hey, let's hold on to Jaden Brayley, don't worry about it, is it was a very wet game. They've been playing Phoenix Crossland at lock quite a bit previously, and they might have looked at that and gone, you know what, wet day up against a massive Warriors pack. Let's just run Crossland at hooker. Let's keep our big forwards on the field. So they might have been saying that. In the negative column, we have the fact that Tyson Frizzell's just come back. So Frizzell comes back. That pushes Dylan Lucas to the bench. Lucas will get some minutes on the edge. Frizzell will probably move to the middle for some of those minutes. He might take some of those lock minutes that Crossland was taking before. That forces Phoenix into the hooker rotation instead. So again, Jaden Brayley, it's a bit dicey. You've got to wait this week. You've got to watch. If you can loophole him, and you can loophole him with someone else that you trust a bit more, you're doing very well in fantasy. I'll just throw that in there first if you've got that luxury. But really, that is probably the play because we can't fully trust Jaden Brayley. And they do play, I think it's relatively early in the round, maybe mid-round. So that's what I'm going to be doing, Jaden Brayley. But let's keep an eye on those minutes. If they're bad, then we might sell him for Havili next week, which is just another wasted trade. But hey, we got to do what you got to do. Jai Gray, he's out for 6 to 8 weeks. Tough go for him. Look, 299K, you got to sell him at this point. He's probably not even going to get back into the team immediately as well. It's a long time off for a rookie. So he had a good run. He was playing good footy. Latrell's back. Party's over. Ethan Strange, 444K. Now, Strange, I'm looking at him and thinking, part of me wants to say that, like mathematically, he's capped out. You can sell him right now, and that's what the stats say. But my heart says that he's a starting half who runs the ball in a team that needs him to play good footy behind a very good forward pack in Canberra. And they've got a really good bye schedule. That's what my heart says. I reckon he's one of those guys who, at some point this year, he'll have that hot run. He'll get himself to, maybe close to 600K in terms of his price. He'll just have that super, super hot run and he'll get up there. So personally, I'm holding Strange for quite a while. I'm planning to hold him through the origin period. I think the half and center dual position thing is really attractive as well. So for me, he's locked in. He's absolutely locked in. These Canberra boys, I'm going to try and keep as many of them as I can because, again, that buy schedule is really good. They've got the buys around 10. I think it's around 14 as well. So you get to play them around 13, 16 in that origin period. So, yeah, Ethan Strange, rock solid hold for me. If you need to sell him, I get it. And I can't logically argue with you, but I just reckon he's going to pop off. So, personally, for me, he's a hold. Jack Bostock is a very different case. Around a similar price, has done a lot better than Strange, but is sort of off the boiler right now. Basically, he just relies on tries to score points. And Strange is a bit the same, to be honest. But Jack Bostock relies on those tries. He's had a very good run. I get that the origin period is really friendly for Dolphins players, but I just think Bostock is one of those guys who you can't trust him. He could score you a 10-point, 15-point game any given week with the way he scores fantasy points. So for Bostock, I'd be happy to sell him if I was you. Sell him off for one of the cheapies. Cheapies is the next section, by the way. We'll talk through these guys. But you sell him for a cheapie, you make 200K, you get to upgrade someone else to someone big. That's my advice on Jack Bostock. If you think that the Dolphins and he will stay red hot and they're going to keep scoring tries like that, go ahead. Ignore me on that one. That's what makes fantasy fun. You can make that call, and half the time you're right, half the time I'm right? John Bateman's the last guy here, and this is one that is a bit more logical, but he's moved to the edge spot from the lock spot. We like him at lock because he makes a lot of tackles there. At edge, he's not a disaster, but let's just wait and see sort of how he goes. Papali'i goes to the middle, which is really weird. I think he's quite a good. I would have thought if I had Papali'i and I was versing the Knights this week, I'd want Papali'i running at Kai Pierce-Paul. It's not a diss on Kai Pierce-Paul's defensive abilities, but it's a nice mismatch. You've got a nuggety guy who can get a bit lower. I reckon he could barge through a few times pretty close to the line if they fed him the right ball. And this is something Parramatta knew how to feed Papali'i the right ball. The Tigers just haven't figured that out in 2 years of him being there. So, hopefully he comes back to Parramatta at the end of his contract. But that's a different conversation. For John Bateman, I wouldn't go buy John Bateman if I was you. Don't go buy him. If you have him, don't sell him. We're just going to stick with him. Let's pause on John Bateman. Let's see what happens. His scoring at the start of this year was pretty average on the edge. Previous years, he's been quite solid. So maybe he'll go back to normal. We hope. Now, quick word from the SRL. I've got a few more highlights to show you guys here. So field goal. But yeah, really the big thing for the SRL is they're looking for new players right now, looking for expansion teams as well. One thing I heard was that Parramatta is currently not in the competition. They were relegated. So if you're a Para fan, that's an easy one. But you can really join any team on here too. So again, link in the description to join that. It's all hosted via a Discord channel, so you can chat with everyone too. And they actually have commentators on the games, so you can see your player in action, see the live commentary. It's super, super cool. I'll put a link to their YouTube channel as well, so you can check that out too. But look, next one here, Jack into the fantasy. Cheapies. All right, for cheapies, this is a really good section. Nothing is given in this section. There is no surefire option here. I'm going to tell you why I like each guy, why I don't, and you've got to make your own call. This is really open slather. These are decisions that will decide your fantasy year, basically. So first one, Dion Tauper. I believe it's pronounced Tauper, but Dion Tauper. I'll call him Dion. He's coming at 230K. Look, South Sydney, I don't know Dion particularly well, right? But South Sydney have Hawkins injured. They've got Lockie Elias injured. Dion is that third option at halfback. And theoretically, you could have said maybe Jack Whiten was the next option as well, but they had the injury to Tass and Campbell Graham, so he has to stay at center. It could be anything here, right? So for Dion, I've heard that he averages low 30s in reserve grade. That's not a great sign. He comes into a South side that is getting beat up. Not a great sign either. But theoretically, he could hold that spot for a really long time. So there's upside there too. Look, I think we can afford to wait a week on Dion. If you need a 230K player for a cash out, none of these other guys are at that price. So go and do it and see what happens. But if you don't need a 230K player, wait a week on Dion is my advice. Next guy here is Blaze Talangi, and this is one that you should not be waiting a week on. Gutho, 4 to 5 weeks, but one of those weeks was a buy, so call it 3 to 4 weeks. Not a great time period. Even if it is 4 weeks, they'll probably be pretty slow to bring him back. But at the same time, Parramatta do need wins, so maybe he comes back faster. Look, for Blaze, if you have Blaze already, hold on to him and enjoy that. I can't bring myself to go and buy him. Look, 318K for a small period at fullback with no guarantee of fantasy points with how Parramatta are playing and a tough matchup against the Broncos this week. It's not that attractive to me, but if you do need that cheap center, there aren't many options right now as far as cheap centers go. So you can pull the trigger on that if you do want to do that. But it's you're gonna have to make another move soon. That's the issue, right? And I guess if it's coverage for some of these Raiders boys, then that might not be the worst thing in the world. But for Blaze, yeah, look, it's a short window. So again, make your own call on this one. Daniel Atkinson's the next guy. So 264K, he's a really nice price. Look, Atkinson has scored 30 twice now. He's had some pretty nice attacking plays in both games. And there's been plenty of opportunities because Cronulla have been opening teams up. Do I think that he's a good fantasy option? No, not at all. Do I think he'll have a couple of games where he looks like he is? Absolutely. So Atkinson next to Hines at that 6th spot, it is probably one of the worst averaging positions in the NRL, right? Not anything against him or Trindle or Moylan or any of these guys, but Hines just hogs everything. He's such a dominant half. It's similar to Cleary with Luai, for example. Like Luai is going to go through the roof next year in his average. But with Hines, he just sort of takes it all. He dominates the team, and he does it well. So no diss on him. But Atkinson just doesn't have much of a chance. So he's running the ball every now and then, but the baseline stats just aren't there. So I'm not into it personally at all. He's one of those guys who could score you 5 or 10 points any given week, which is pretty dangerous. Armstrong is much more interesting. So 302K. A lot of talk about Sharp being the preferred fullback in this team, but now Armstrong has played well enough to earn that spot. He seems to be holding it down. It's really interesting because he's got the Tigers this week. So with that and a really nice buy schedule, they have a buy in round 12 and they got a bit of a run. I actually quite like Armstrong here. So 302K, I was a little iffy about him just because he wasn't the preferred fullback and they had some matchups that could have been tougher. That wet game against the Warriors could have gone either way for him. He had some mistakes, but he also, played with a lot of heart. So yeah, Armstrong, 302K. That 26-point game has changed my mind on him a bit. I sort of thought he might be one of those lower base fullbacks. I still think he could have some quiet games, but his work rate's pretty good. He's pretty explosive. Knights play decent. Tigers this week. It's a game that could open up. I actually think Armstrong's probably the strongest of the lot here. And you can afford 302K, then jump on him. It could be for the whole year as well. Tommy McKaylee is the last one. So McKaylee at 289K. McKaylee scored, I think it was 35 points in 21 minutes last week. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Look, I don't even know what to say about that. He's playing good. So I look at McKaylee and I sort of see something similar to Xavier Willison a month ago or a couple of months ago when Willison had that opportunity and he was looking like dodgy minutes, dodgy job security. It's very similar with McKaylee. Difference is the Broncos have an amazing forward pack and Willison is very talented, whereas McKaylee is a little bit behind Willison in terms of the talent scale. He's been a bit more of a journeyman in his career. But the Cowboys are much more needy at the prop spot. So it sort of balances out. What do I think about McKaylee? I look at him and I reckon by the time everyone realizes that he's good and a good buy, he's going to be like 450K. So I like McKaylee at 29K. I think it's actually a really smart pickup if you can go get him right now. He's one of those guys where it's very similar to Wiramu Greg last year for Parramatta, for example. He was not playing big minutes at all. And I just sort of thought, through the origin period, para forwards will be out. They had a few injuries, that kind of thing as well. And he absolutely dominated, got to, sort of 450K. McKaylee is very similar. So Ruben Cotter, Jeremiah Nanai, they're both going to play origin. McKaylee will steal more and more minutes. Robson's a chance at Origin too, so that would mean that Granville won't steal the lock minutes, and he'll steal hooker minutes instead. So for McKaylee, I guess my big concern was Lukey coming back and him dropping out, but he's over Granville. So I think he's a red hot shout. I'm looking at potentially moving Chevy Stewart for McKaylee, just because I'm not certain Chevy comes back into the team, and I don't really trust him as a fantasy scorer as well. Maybe he does come back into the team. I don't know. Rapana comes back soon. They gave Hopewadi a run at fullback as well. I'm just a bit worried about Chevy Stewart. So I'll have a look at that one. It's an optional trade. It might get pocketed instead. Watch list. This is the best part of the show. This is dead set the best part of the show. So for the watch list, Tallis Duncan, let's keep an eye on those minutes. He might be one of those guys who plays 60 minutes off the bench instead of starting. Silva Havili is not normally a big minute player, so I can see that happening. Look, Tallis Duncan, it's the fantasy goggles for me for sure. He's got a pretty high break even though, so you can wait a week on him. I reckon he could be one of those guys who sneaks in, plays big minutes, and we're all talking about him next week. So if you've got a draft league or you've got a spare spot, stash Tallis Duncan, see what happens. I'm not making any promises, but that's the length I would go for Tallis Duncan right now. Greg Marzu is the next guy here, 456K. Had his 9 tackle breaks in this game. Hasn't been scoring tries. Has not been scoring well, but this was a 36-point performance. So I've got my eyes on him just because he is that guy who can average 50 and has done so in previous years. He's also averaged well without Ponga in the past too. So look, if he gets down to that 400K mark in particular, they've got 2 more games before they have a bye in round 12. I am eyeing Greg Marzu off in round 13. Now, this is where I start to think, you know what, maybe I can take a risk on one of these other players, like a Fayalongo or someone like that. And if it goes wrong, then hey, I can move to Marzu instead. So that's where my head's at. I'm sort of planning to get him in about 3 weeks' time. Halem Lukey, 454K, scored quietly, played about 29 minutes last week. He's going to get nice and cheap. If he gets down into the 300s, it's pretty hard to say no, especially if he gets a starting spot at some point back from Finafuyaki. Now, the reason I think he will is the Cowboys have re-signed Lukey for about 5 years, and they've let Finafuyaki sign elsewhere with the Dolphins instead. So surely they rate Lukey. Surely he gets that minutes roll back as the season progresses. Cowboys have really good fixtures as well. I'm just got my eye on him. He probably needs to get a bit cheaper for me to do it, but hey, eyes up footy. Next one, Cardi Party. The Cardi Party was too long to fit into this section. Bryce Cartwright, it's a long name. Look, 599K. He's dropped about 110K in his last 2 games. So my eyes are on him in terms of, could he get into the 400s? Could he get to 450K, something like that? And does he get that starting spot back at some point? If he gets nice and cheap and then gets that starting spot back, mate, I am all over that. I am all over that, especially since Parramatta will need Madison in the middle through the origin period. Guys like RCG, Paulo, and Hopgood are all a potential chance at playing origin. So, yeah, for the Cardi Party, it could be Cardi Party time very soon. Keep an eye on him. We'll see when that sort of drop-off stops and that upswing starts to happen again. Last guy here, Isaac Tungo. He has dropped so much cash recently. He was like 750K a month ago. He had a shocker. He scored a try and got like 12 points last week and got himself suspended for 1 week. Absolutely crazy stuff. So for Tungo, at some point, he's going to be 550K, 520K, one of these sorts of prices. Red hot option. Red hot. Give it like 2 to 3 weeks. And here we go. This is another one, right? So I'm talking about these guys I want in 2 to 3 weeks. I could realistically have 2 guys from this list in Marzu and Tungo coming into my side in 3 weeks' time when they're at the right price and when they're primed, because they're those guys who have previously averaged like 50 points. And that's what I'm buying for. I want those guys who are going to return to the mean. And that's when we talk about the watch list. We talk about guys who are out of form right now because we think they might bounce back to their previous form. They don't always, but a lot of the time they do. And I'm willing to take that bet most of the time. Anyway, that's buy, hold, sell this week. Let me know in the comments what trades you're thinking of. Join the Discord community as well. If you stayed this long, you're definitely a hardcore fantasy player. So I got a link to the Discord below, and I'll see you guys there. Happy to chat there. Best of luck this week. Hopefully you all crush it. 1,000